We know what you've come for, and now we're going to give it to you. You're listening to the No Such Thing podcast.
Hello everybody, this is Cornell from the No Such Thing podcast. Thanks for joining me. Tonight was supposed to be a Skype interview with Doug Hijack. And, well, I don't do many Skype interviews. I usually keep it audio, but tonight I thought I would go for Skype, but the video quality on my end was terrible. It must be just something to do with my, I just got a new laptop, and the camera, the resolution was terrible. It was good on Doug's end, but on my half, you could barely make me out. So, either I get an external webcam or something and try it that way, or I don't know what to do about that, but I'm just going to release this as an audio-only podcast. This is the third time I've tried this, and I keep getting it wrong. I don't know what it is about these, integrated cameras on computers, but they never seem to be good enough, or I'm doing something wrong, I'm not sure. But anyway, most of you will know who Doug Hijack is. He's pretty legendary in the Bigfoot community, but he is a researcher, an inventor, a scientist, a wildlife researcher, and he also produced Monster Quest that ran for about 4 years. He also did the documentary Legend Meets Science. That was a 2003 documentary. The guy's done a lot. We get into the Snell Grove Lake incident, and I forgot to ask him about the time when he offered Bob Gimlin $1 million to come clean and tell everybody that the Paddy was a guy in a suit, and he flat out refused before Doug had hardly even finished the sentence. So, but I just told you the story, so there you go. But anyway, it was great to have him on the show. He brings up some fascinating points that I never thought before, and I hope you all enjoy it. Doug, thanks very much for coming on the show, and thanks for sending me over your bio. I'm wondering how you even get the time to do these kind of things. Judging by your bio, it's very extensive.
I work probably an average of 20 hours a day. That's how I do it. Every day, 20 hours, yep. What
are you working on right now?
Oh my God. Today, I literally came up with an idea for like 20 different products. Drew them all up, did the art on them, got them priced, got them figured out, and sent them off to the engineer.
Wow.
Yeah, that was kind of my. I have a goal of one item per day to invent and bring to market, and so they got to go in the pipe every day. It's just a goal of mine, and so I was behind this week because I took a vacation.
Now, do you have a team working on this kind of stuff, or is it just all you?
Yeah, I've got a whole team. Yep, 65 people.
Right. So you're obviously, for people that don't know your name, most people listening to this podcast are going to know your name because they're into Bigfoot, and your name is all over the Bigfoot. If you read up on extensively on Bigfoot, your name's all over the place. That's how I got to know you. I mean, I've only been into this subject the last couple of years. When I started this podcast, it was a podcast about everything. I was going to try to make it like a poor man's Joe Rogan, but then I had a couple of like Bigfoot interviews, and that just kind of blew me away. Like eyewitnesses, and I'm like, hold on a second, this is crazy. There's something to this, So,
yeah, I'd say.
So then eventually through meeting those people like Alex and Crystal Panic and stuff, I got to know more people, and I just became hooked on the subject. Is that how you got into it yourself, or?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a matter of actually, being interested in the topic, but then suddenly being caught off guard and seeing footprints for myself, up in the Arctic. So I was up in the Arctic, and we had just literally stopped to take a break on shore because it was really rough that day. So we pull up on shore, Cornell, and there's footprints coming out of the water. It's shallow water. If you can imagine kind of like the Caribbean, but way up north in the Arctic. That's what this area was like. Sand beaches everywhere, sand dunes, pea gravel,
Wow.
small trees. Yeah, it was very, I mean, if I dropped you off there, you'd swear you were in the Caribbean. So these footprints are coming out of the water onto the beach, clear as day in this wet sand. I mean, crystal clear. And they just look like giant, human footprints. And so we followed them, and we're just kind of like, still kind of in that mental shock. Do you know what I mean? When you see something that doesn't make sense. So we follow these footprints. We get up to the pea gravel, and there was kind of a big rock by these footprints. And I told this guy that was with us, he was 300 pounds. I said, can you leap off that rock? So immediately I wanted to do a forensic test, to see what kind of weight it would take to impress the footprint that deep. Because we weren't even denting the pea gravel. And it was kind of damp. It was kind of drizzly that day. But anyhow, so he leaps off. He doesn't even dent it. 300-pound big guy. So I said, let's keep following him, And so we follow him, and we come to a little stand of stunted spruce trees. And they're like 6 foot, 7 foot high. They're not very big. And here's a footprint in front of the tree trunk and directly behind it. So whatever it was stepped over the top of the tree, directly over the top of it. And so at that point, when you're there, and there's nobody up here, no natives even that lived up there. There's no polar bears. It's too far south for a polar bear, but too far north for any other bear. And at that point, I was kind of a bear expert because I was doing a lot of bear research for the Bear Center. So I knew they were humanoid footprints, and they were 16 inches long. And then you're thinking, oh, whatever it was stepped over a tree. And then we got past those trees, and you could see the footprints going miles out into the tundra. In the same kind of tightrope type footprints, the straight line. 5-6 feet apart in some cases, but perfectly straight line. It went on for the, as far as my eye could see.
And this eventually went into woods or something?
No, there's no woods. See, it's a treeless area. There's just a few trees here and there, and they're stunted. They could be 300 years old, 7 foot tall, because of the cold weather. So at that point, I was hooked. I just came home from that trip, and I was obsessed. I wanted answers. And this was kind of right when the internet started, and there wasn't a lot of
mid-90s.
There wasn't. No, it was early 91. So there wasn't much I could do. And I'd heard about Peter Byrne, looked him up, sent Peter Byrne a tape we had made of the tracks, photos and videotape. In fact, I think Peter still has my tape. But anyhow, to make a long story short, I got home, finally met up with Matt Moneymaker. And Matt's like, oh, these things are everywhere. And I'm like, well, what do you mean everywhere? And he goes, oh, yeah, from coast to coast, south, north, anywhere there's woods, water, and hills. Well, right away, that made sense because where we were, there was obviously forest in the water. There weren't any hills, but I went, oh my God. And I thought, it's just amazing. So we hung up, and I think I called him back, and we ended up talking for hours. And that's where I got the idea to do a documentary, the Ledge of Meat Science.
Right, that was 2003.
Yep. Before that, I was only doing wildlife shows, just strict wildlife shows. So it changed my life.
That must be happening to, other people, even David Attenborough, people that have done shows like that must have.
Yeah. Well, look at Les Stroud. Same thing. He's just out in the bush. Something happens he can't explain. It wasn't footprints, but it was branches or trees that were shaking and hearing what he described as a gorilla. And, there's no gorillas in the north.
Yeah.
And he actually was, I think he was in British Columbia when that happened. And I was just due north of him, where I found my footprints.
Yeah. I mean, Well, I mean, this must happen just to everyday people all the time. They must hear
Oh
stuff,
yeah,
even see
no doubt.
stuff, and just ignore it.
Yep.
Even when I look back at some things that happened to me, I'm like, huh, you know, that could have been. But
Yeah,
people would just ignore it and just chalk it off to something else.
I could have done that too, but I'm not that kind of person.
Yeah, me neither.
I remember once, as an example, I remember once glimpsing what I thought was a mallard duck off to my left when I was driving, and it's got a green head, from a mallard duck, but it seemed really high, like really high in the air. So of course, most people would just drive by and go, well, just no. I did a Yui really quick, ran into the bush, and there was probably the only one still ever photographed was a Canadian goose, a giant Canadian goose, and a mallard duck cross. So it was a Canadian goose with this bright green head.
Yeah, we have those everywhere here. The Canadian geese.
Yes, but you don't have them with bright green heads.
No.
And so you can imagine, seeing that out of the corner of my eye, most people would have just driven. I didn't do that.
Yeah.
I remember I ran to get a camera. I found a store that was nearby, ran to get a camera, praying those geese were still there, and photographed two what I named the malgoose. To this day, no one's ever photographed one. And I got videotape and photographs of it.
Wow. Now, you also are famous for the documentary Monster Quest. You were the producer on that show, right?
Right, yeah. And that was a 4-year series. I think we ended up doing about 70 episodes.
And
71
you went
episodes.
all over the world.
That took place everywhere, but mainly in the U.S. But there were trips that we did take. We went as far as the Himalayas to do a Yeti show. Certainly down into Mexico, but most of them were, in the U.S.
Yeah,
most of them.
there's enough around here. What do you think of the Loch Ness Monster? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I studied that for the In Search of series, the new one. And I had to study the loch in a way I'd never really studied it, like really deep, because I was planning on a live event to kick off that series. And so I had planned out all this equipment, and then I had to do research on deep research on every creature that lives in that loch. It certainly could be a Wells catfish, I guess would be, if I had to think it's a normal animal, it would be a Wells catfish, because there's nothing to stop them from continuing to grow. They can just grow and grow and grow. They can live 600 years. From all the research I did, they can live 1,000 years.
Wow.
And so that's one possibility. Otherwise, it is connected to the sea,
Right.
so it could be, it could be anything from the ocean, and God knows, what did they discover? A new whale last week.
Oh, really? Yeah, it could be a whale.
Yeah, they did. They discovered a new whale. Not that it was, completely different visually, but it was a whole new species.
Now, what's the most compelling creature that you ever researched for the show?
Oh my goodness. I think there are, I really can't. And people always, ask me, is there a favorite? Not really. I mean, Bigfoot is the one I'm most interested in because of my personal experiences. And I think it's the most common cryptid out there, and it's the one that's reported the most. It's, certainly it seems to live in all coordinates of the U.S. and Canada. But I don't know. I really don't. I can't answer that question. They're all, to me, when you're really into it, you're really interested in whatever you're studying.
Yeah. Now, what about the giant squid? Tell us about that story. A lot of people want to hear about that.
Okay. Well, I can kind of tie back the theory I had back to remember the day I told you I saw the footprints?
Right.
Well, the reason I was up in that area was because of something weird that I had seen on a previous trip. Not at that lake, but at a lake a little bit south called Knowlton Lake up in Northwest Territories. We were up there fishing, and we were fishing at the mouth of the Windy River, if anybody wants to look that up. And I was reeling in what people would think would be a trophy fish, like 30-pound lake trout. Behind it was what looked like a sea monster, which I could see it was a trout, but it was 6-7 feet long. So it was massive. And it was trying to swallow whole my 30-pound trout.
Wow.
So a 30-pound trout is about 44 inches long, 19 and a half in girth. And so could you imagine the freshwater fish that was just going to swim up and swallow that thing whole? And so I remember looking at my guide going, oh my God, it was bigger than a man. And he goes, we see those all the time. You'll never catch one. They're just too rare and too slow, and they want bait that's huge. So I went home after that trip, and I called a biologist, and I had read about a northern pike getting out of their niche and growing to huge sizes. I'd had read stories from ancient times where they reported pike that could eat a horse that had grown to be 1,000 years. And I just, and I thought, well, maybe these fish had gotten out of their niche. And this leads me to my giant squid theory. So I get home, I call a biologist, and I told him what I had seen. He goes, oh, that's funny. I've seen trout that big too. So here I'm hooked up with this fisheries biologist. And I said, hey, do you want to go up to the Arctic and try to film one of these things? We can build all sorts of crazy lures and lures with big cameras on them, huge lures. So we went to work and we went up there, and that's why I was up there. But so the squid was just kind of an extension of the giant fish, in that I had a theory that they also got out of their niche and didn't breed. And that's what I mean by getting out of their niche. They don't breed, they stay deep, stay at the bottom, they become cannibals of their own kind. And I figured that there were probably squid that would live beyond the 2 years, stay deep, maybe live for 30 years, 40 years if they never bred, and just learn to cannibalize, the smaller squid that are swimming up and down the water column. And so the goal was to, build a lure big enough to catch a big squid, which some people would think would be a giant, to be able to hook a camera on it and a payload to carry that, so that squid would swim down carrying our camera like a Trojan.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. It was a multi-step process. And of course, did we get lucky when we filmed, a true Architeuthis? Or is it real easy to do? It's kind of like the Bob Gimlin footage, and the Roger Patterson and Gimlin footage. They thought they could just do it again. Both of them. I remember talking to Bob, and he's like, yeah, we just figured we'd come back next month or next weekend and just repeat it, do a better job even of it, Well, other people have tried to do what we've done by putting cameras on squid, and they haven't done it yet. And so were we extremely lucky? And it won't be done again for another 50 years or 100 years? Or will it happen next week? I don't know.
Still a hell of an idea.
Yeah, but that's all we did. We put a camera on a big squid. And that's kind of how I feel any of these new discoveries can be made, is by a lot of effort. I just don't think you can hang a camera trap on a tree and get a picture of a Bigfoot. I think it's going to be many, many steps in order to photograph a Bigfoot or some other crypto creature. It just, or the creature in Loch Ness or Lake Champlain. It's going to be something really clever.
Yeah, you got to outsmart. I mean, do you think that Sasquatch can see the infrared spectrum? Do you think that that's the answer to that mystery?
Well, it actually could be the opposite. I'm suspecting the absolute opposite, that other things are glowing on the camera itself, that it would see in UV spectrum. It's been now proven that, like, caribou can see in UV, which makes things like urine glow, certain plastics glow, paint glow, all, including that, the white plastic on the passive lens,
Right.
that white, that glows under UV light. So if they could see in UV light, like other creatures that come from the far north, it would give them a whole lot of gifts, because there really isn't any UV light coming off a camera. Those are passive sensors. They're basically gathering heat. They're gathering body heat. Basically, the electricity and energy off your body or an animal's body is what they gather. And so I don't think they're seeing those. But what if they see UV light like caribou? Now those camera traps are going to glow. Totally different ballgame.
So what about applying paint or something like heat-resistant paint or something like that?
Yeah, in fact, painting the whole thing flat black might be the best thing to try. Just completely, black it out.
Yeah.
Completely. We've come out, I developed a new type of camera, a game camera wrap to match the bark, which would also hide the some of the plastics, but it wouldn't hide the passive IR sensor. So I need to experiment with things that you could put in front of the IR sensor. Once again, Cornell, these are just theories. They may not be, they may not have any bearing.
Yeah.
But I'm more suspectful of UV vision than I am IR vision.
I've also heard people say that they could just see you placing them there. That's another theory.
Yeah, and obviously that could happen in many cases. And I'm certainly would imagine that they are in command of their environment.
Yeah.
But, although like a black bear can memorize huge amounts of its territory, photographic kind of memory, I doubt they can remember every tree.
Right.
And every branch. I think that might be pushing it. So at some point, an animal's going to mess up. But what if these game cameras are glowing because of the plastic? Now they're sticking out like sore thumbs. So that, that's just, once again, it's just my latest idea.
Now, do you want to get into your first sighting? You saw the footprints. That's
Right.
your first experience.
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
what happens next? Do you see one, or is it just a series of footprints?
Well, what happened to me was just simply being able to hang out with people that, witnesses, interviewing them, conducting science. So I ended up getting funding from Discovery Channel to do Legend Meets Science. And I met people like Meldrum and Dr. Fehrenbach and Jimmy Chilcutt, and I got to test and see, are there really dermal ridges on footprints? And so that opened up my eyes. And so at that point, no, I had no other experience except hearing the stories, talking to so many eyewitnesses. And then once I did a show and it was on the air, that opened up tons of witnesses to me, that were willing to talk to me. And ended up getting a show called Mysterious Encounters, Matt Moneymaker, Autumn Williams, and we did that for 1 year, and that allowed us to travel all over the country. Still, I had not seen a Bigfoot. First time I saw a Bigfoot was just by chance, driving from up north. There was one standing at the side of the road, and it was literally drying off from a swim. It was waving its arms. It was windy, and it was just, I got within 4 or 5 feet of it. And, when you see something like that and you're approaching it, you're thinking, oh, it's a moose. He's got his back turned to me. And I saw the waving. I thought it was its antlers. And then you see the fingers and the broad shoulders and the hair hanging off the bottom of the arms. And you're just like, your brain is just trying to figure out, what are you looking at?
I fell in the blanks.
But when you get 4 feet from it and you can see the details like we both saw, and you see the fingers and you see the sheer size of it, and the bulkiness of it. And then we were past it. We drove right past it. And you're just in shock. And I remember we pulled over eventually to look at a Google map so I could mark where we had seen it. And it was right where a stream came out of a state forest. It couldn't have been anything else. It just couldn't have been.
Did you see his face?
No, it had its back turned to us.
Oh.
See, yeah, I've had 3 sightings now, and every time it said its back. It's walking away, which most people is the type of sightings most people have. It's either sideways to them or it's slightly back into the side, And so it's kind of a problem. I still want to see the face of one.
Yeah, my theory about so many people see them cross the road is because they can't hear or smell us coming. I think that's why they're seen more crossing the road than anywhere else by eyewitnesses.
Well, or it's just like, why did the chicken cross the road just to get to the other side?
Yeah.
They just may need to travel, and just like they don't care, And I don't think that they mean to cross in front of us. And I think they just cross, it's just kind of, they're making a beeline. They're that efficient. I don't think they stand and wait for traffic. Yeah. I think when they're on a mission to go from point A to point B, they just go. And they just cross whatever road is in front of them. A guy that works for me had a daytime sighting near where I live. And I remember him calling me, and he goes, "Did deer walk upright?" And I said, "What do you mean, did deer walk upright?" He goes, "Well, I just saw this giant animal. It's kind of a reddish brown, the color of deer, but a little more red, just walk upright in front of my truck." And I said, "Well, it certainly wasn't a deer." And he takes me over there and he tells me how it stepped over a barbed wire fence. He got out there and the barbed wire is up to my chest. Stepped right over it, but broad daylight, Don't ask me. Road crossing.
Yeah. Do you want to get into this story fascinates me. I've heard you tell it a few times. I'm sure you're sick of telling it, but the Snellgrove Lake incident.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've told that a few times.
I love that story.
Well, first off, I had been going up to this cabin back when I was just doing, it was kind of an outdoor magazine type show, variety show. And I was producing that. I was not doing anything with monsters. And I was at a sports show, and a Canadian outfitter came up to me and he said, "Hey, you should come up to my place and do a TV story." He said, "I just got it done. It's got solar panels. You can take a hot shower. It's got a built-in shower. You have a little electricity there, with battery-powered solar and whatnot." So we went up there. I loved it so much, I just kept going there and going there and going there. It was my happy spot where I could go and catch a ton of fish, get away from the world, all the pressures.
Just by yourself?
Yep. Yeah. Well, I would go up there with like 5 guys because you can only have 6 people. But I would invite a new group of people a lot of times to take up there, so I could share it with them. Well, then one of the guys that I brought up there stole my favorite date to go, which was June 8th. Every year I'd go up on June 8th, and he stole that date. It was kind of a joke between us, like, "Hey, you stole my date." And he was like, "Well, yeah, whatever." It's like, "Dude," so he goes, you can have this August date that we used to have. August, 17th. So I started going in August, and the first time we went up there, we had activity. And then it hit me, of course, why maybe? Because the blueberries were ripe. When I was going in June, there were no blueberries. Nothing had grown yet. So they probably weren't there. And I'd never really gone that late before up there. And just by chance, we brought my daughter, Joe brought his daughter, and Vladimir, another friend of ours, brought his daughter. So we had 3 young girls up there, ages from like 8 years old up to 10. And of course, I don't think anything will attract an animal that's suspicious of people, but better than maybe having 3 little kids. So no doubt we were being watched. But we were pulling out of a little lake, Cornell, that I call Hidden Lake at Snell, because you can't see it from the lake. It's got a thing like that, and so you have to go around this thing, and it's completely hidden. Nobody knows about it. So we go back there, and we have to pull down like a half a mile of a stream to get in this lake. But we were coming back, and my daughter was making, she said monkey sounds because it helped her catch fish. And right away there was a wood knock right next to our boat when we were just about to enter into the main lake. And of course, in hindsight, I'm thinking that was a warning to maybe other ones that were on the shore or whatever that basically were coming out now. So we decided to try a wood knock, which we had never done up there. And so we wait till like 2 a.m. We do a wood knock, and we get an answer just feet from our fire. I mean, it was instant, seconds, and bam,
wow,
right by the fire. There's just really freaked us. It even freaked me out because it was so close. I mean, the people that we were with, they just, the two guys, they just their faces turned white because they knew, you got to have hands to do that. So we did the wood knock, and then we got the answer back. And I told one of there was only one girl that was up. It was Joe's daughter. And I said, Maria, why don't you take a little rock and throw it, where the sound came, throw it underhand so it's not aggressive. So she throws a rock underneath, underhand, and we got one returned, like right away.
Oh, boy.
So we played that game for a while. Yeah, it's really interesting. And so eventually, it all ended with a big splash where it threw a big rock into the lake. It's kind of a goodbye. The grand finale, and it was gone. And so we wait a little while. Vladimir even did a wood knock. No answer, no more rocks, nothing, just quiet. So everybody's tired, yawning, except me. And we go into the cabin. I said, I'm just going to stay up a little bit, read a Field and Stream magazine, until I get tired. I'm not tired yet. So I'm reading this magazine by the candlelight. And eventually I start yawning. And I go and I get up. I go to the window. There's a little window that faces the forest. And I flick on a solar-powered light right above my head. And of course, if you could imagine being outside the cabin, seeing a dark cabin, and then suddenly I'm there, with my hair glows, in the sun or in the under fluorescent light. And whatever it was that was out there just started screaming, throwing things at the cabin. Next thing you know, I'm hearing 2 screams, and then I'm hearing something running up on the roof, pounding on the roof, stuff getting thrown on the roof. And then what sounded like 2 creatures fighting, like they were not mad at me, but they were fighting amongst each other. Which was really, kind of weird. And of course, I look up and the skylight's open.
Oh, man.
It's a big skylight. And I'm envisioning something dropping down into the cabin, like a juvenile.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a good situation.
It's like Ape Canyon.
Yeah. And so the cabin is not only getting stuff thrown at it and all this screaming and chatter and stuff on the roof. I finally get the skylight closed. I get back in front of the kitchen, and I'm standing in front of the sink, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I got to get help. So I run into Vladimir's room, and I started just pounding on him as hard as I could, to get him up. He barely even turned over. He didn't even move. And I ran in, excuse me, my voice is really bad today. So I run into Joe's room, and I start pounding on him. And he just, it's like they were just dead to the world. And then while I was in his room, it just quit. It just totally quit.
Now, are the girls up at this point, or are they still sleeping?
Everybody is still sleeping. To this day, I still cannot imagine how everybody stayed asleep in that kind of commotion. I mean, it was, not only were they throwing things at the cabin, they were lifting the cabin, they were rocking the cabin. The activity on the roof, the sticks and logs were getting chucked, up on the roof. Yeah, it was like being in a bad B movie. That makes sense.
Is this after seeing the footprints and all this kind of stuff? You know that Bigfoot exists at this point.
I knew these things existed, but I had never done any research up there. I went up there to fish, to rest, to get away from the cell phones, to get away from the radios. There was no excuse up there to use your cell. There's no signals. There's not even any AM radio signals up there. There's nothing. So you have no choice but to go to bed early, get up early, catch your own food, cook your own food, and go to sleep again, and just relax. But I think, the biggest thing that changed everything at Snell was me telling the outfitter what had happened, and then he goes, "Oh, the cabin got destroyed." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" Because I didn't see any damage. He goes, "Well, we put everything back together." And I said, "We can't fix claw marks and scratch marks," because he said a bear broke in and wrecked everything. I said, "Chuck, I know every square inch of this cabin. All the cabinets you said were torn off, the shelves." I said, you gotta have, you gotta grab it with your mouth. You gotta use your claws to do all this." He goes, "Oh, there were no claw marks, no, nothing. Just destroyed everything inside the cabin. It also destroyed everything in the shed." And he had a big, huge gas tank, for the float plane. Huge. I mean, just, 6 foot tall, big gas tank, probably weighs about 1,200 pounds. It was flipped upside down. Wow. So we're talking, and I'm like, "Chuck, you know damn well that wasn't a bear. Because there's no damage in the cabin. I know what bear damage looks like." And he thinks about it, and he kind of he kind of agrees with me in an unofficial way that, yeah, I could probably believe it's a Bigfoot rather than a person, And, now that I'm the one that completely ruled out bear swarm, because bears will gnaw at all the woodwork. They have to, you can't grab a cabinet and yank it off the wall without grabbing it somehow. So bears can only use their teeth and hands, or their paws.
Well, he's got really good reasons for not wanting to believe that, right? It's his cabin.
Well, yeah, it's his cabin, but this is a tourist cabin that he rents out maybe 5-6 times a year, to 6 people at a time. You get flown in, you get dropped off by a float plane. I mean, there's no way in there. Maybe in the winter you could get in there by snowmobile, across the different lakes and across the portages. But in the summer, it would be damn near an impossible trip. So, and he says, "Well, I built a nail board to keep the bear, what we thought was a bear that broke in." And he said whatever it was did step on it and left, blood everywhere. And I looked at it and I said, "Well, one, it's not a nail board, it's a screw board." Oh. And I said, "Yeah, I saw it out there and I flipped it screw side ends because our kids were here and I was worried one of them falling and, landing on that thing." And he tells me there's blood. We go to look at it and I can see on the back there was dried red crud. And I could see on the screws what looked like fat tissue and flesh. And so I grabbed it, put it in the shed, and I said, "Well, we're going to come back. I'll come back up with scientists." And that's where I came up with Jeff, Kurt Nelson, and then eventually with Esteban Sarmiento, who's a primatologist. And they ended up doing the DNA off the screws, which was very old, very weathered. But we had chunks of flesh, chunks of fat. And they came out, they couldn't get that many base pairs. But I remember that Kurt showed me, he said there were 5 base pairs that were the same, some of the same genes that were different in humans and chimps. So it was human DNA, but it had these 5 genes. We're talking nuclear DNA that were the same ones that we shared with, or divergent with chimpanzees.
And so
chimps don't live in.
Yeah, there's actual footage of this wrecked cabin, isn't there? I think it was in your documentary.
Yep, it's in there. Yep. That was insurance footage that he had taken. Because he goes, "Oh, I've got footage if you want to see it." And I said, "Oh, yeah, you're not darn wrong." Because I'm thinking, if that was a Bigfoot, they're going to leave a certain kind of damage. And here's what was most interesting. Everybody would go up there, and everybody would just, they bring a pack of playing cards. Well, they would just leave them there. There were stacks of playing cards, in decks of playing cards. Maybe 20, 30 decks of playing cards. Whatever broke in there tore every one of them into little tiny round circles, each playing card. There was every piece of plastic that was in that cabin was broken into little pieces. Everything was wrecked. I mean, the shelves ripped off the wall, stove, even the stove upside down, sink pipes bent, debris all over the floor. But the only thing I thought, well, if it's kids, or if it was, let me say kids, if it was people or a bear, there was one poster of all of the North American or the Canadian animals. I mean, this is right out of Harry and the Hendersons. There was a poster that showed all these animals. It was untouched. It was hanging by one staple on the door, and that had been there for 20 years prior. Of every year I've gone up there, that poster has been on that one door, and it wasn't even torn. It was gently taken off and still hanging by one staple. But everything else in that whole cabin was destroyed.
That's weird.
No windows broken. Whatever it was shut the door behind itself. Whatever it was may have came in numerous times is kind of what I'm thinking.
Over a period of time and done this.
Yeah, they would have known. Yeah, they would have never known. And just came in there and just played with the stuff in there. And I don't think it did it. I don't think it wrecked everything maliciously. I think it was just curious, maybe.
Yeah, that's my next question.
What is paper like when you peel it apart? What is this hard crap, and it broke. There was, the only plastic was up there with these, I think he had kept a boom box, because people kept flying their boom box up, and he'd get mad because it was heavy. And every ounce cost him money in fuel for the airplane. So he finally left one up there. Well, it destroyed that thing into little pieces.
So you still go up there, or was that it? You're like,
I have not. Yeah, I did. I went up there several times after, and in every case, we went in August, and in every case except the one time we went back for Monster Quest, we had no activity. But then after that, I kept going in August, and every time we did have activity, and I kept trying to get footage of this thing, and no matter what I did, Cornell, it fooled us. I mean, we did mechanical things. I did things like fish line traps, with invisible fish line even. And this thing would set those traps off. It would scare us off by smacking a tree down, breaking a tree down to scare us. And then it would go and trip our trap when we were gone or, in the cabin. It would test them. It wouldn't trip them. It would just test them. As an example, we're dealing with something very smart.
Things like Wile E. Coyote or something.
Well, it would obviously plan it out where it could scare you away and then test it, right? And then never touch it again because we'd reset it and it would never come near it. And the other weird thing is no other animals would ever come by any food bait. Once this thing came near it, nothing would touch it. I mean, there's plenty of least mice up there. It's a big wilderness. I mean, they have pine martens and mice, and they do have some small black bears, but you don't see a lot of wildlife when you're up there. Yeah. I've seen one moose, one pine marten, one black bear, one seagull in 30 years.
Wow.
And grouse.
Now, whatever came of the DNA then?
Though that's just it. You get human-like DNA. You've got 5 genes that are divergent in chimps. Okay. What are you going to do then? Where does that go? So you've got something with a little chimp And here's why you can't do anything. Because apparently 1 in 5,000 humans, approximately, according to Kurt, may have those same divergent genes. But only 1 in 5,000 humans. So to think it was a human that stepped on a screwboard,
right,
left its genes and just was one of those 5,000. But still, there's nothing you can do but get the info out there. What does it do? It raises the bar that far.
Yeah.
Anybody hearing this, it might, cause them to go look at that and go, holy crap. Yeah, it's, might convince 1 or 2 people. It may get some scientists, but a few hundred base pairs compared to what I'm hoping to do this summer, 3 billion base pairs. I'm hoping to get the entire genome this summer.
Wow.
3 billion.
Now, obviously the government knows about these things, right? They have to.
God, you would think, that they would have just invested a little bit of money, which to us is a lot, $100,000, $200,000, God knows what. But yeah, they would have the wherewithal, and the technology to just figure it out.
Yeah. Do you think there's some grand conspiracy to keep a lid on this?
Not really. I just think things are so compartmentalized that, you know what I mean? There's just so few people that know. I think there's a lot of agencies that know, a lot of Department of Natural Resource departments that know, that have run into them, have seen them, found the footprints, a lot of Forest Service workers, game wardens. But there's small groups or cliques of people that are in the know.
Yeah.
And they're not telling anybody because they want to keep their jobs. So I think it's only a conspiracy as to 5 people in an office that might go, hey, let's not tell anybody what happened. Do you know what I mean? So a bunch of mini conspiracies.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, mini conspiracies.
Because the grand consensus in the Bigfoot community is that there's they don't want another situation like the spotted owl, that cost the lumber industry billions, I guess.
Yeah, that was kind of crazy. I remember that. But, it could be a bunch of people in the government, but I doubt it. I think it would have leaked out.
So you're still working on this. You're working on this summer and trying to... Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I just saw... I got a notification. Yep. So you're trying to map the genome of this thing this summer.
Right.
Now, what does that involve?
Well, it'll involve DNA, and it'll involve a lab that knows what they're doing. I found such a lab. I need good 3, 4, 5, 6, under 20 skin cells. Right? That's all I need. Then I can get 3 billion base pairs. If it's unidentified, some of it will be identified. Then a bunch is going to drop to the bottom, right? That's the good part, because that's usually where it ends for most, geneticists. So people send in whatever to a normal gene deciphering lab. They're going to just be able to match up a little bit, and that's the end of it. No, we have to then take the data that drops to the bottom and figure out what it's related to. It's got to be related to something. It just has to be. If for some reason it goes through the entire gene bank of every possible animal, every ancient man, all over the world, all over Europe, then we'll be really baffled. But then I'm going to be dealing with people who are willing to hopefully publish a scientific paper. Because then it'll be able to be repeated, enough times where a paper can be published.
No, what do you think, personally, what do you think these things are? Do you think that they are like what Jeff Meldrum thinks, or non-human primate?
I have not come to any conclusion.
No.
How's that? Yeah, I can't give you an answer because I've come to no conclusion. I know that they probably poop. They probably bleed. They definitely break things. They definitely throw rocks. So are they metaphysical? Here sometimes, not. I don't know. Are they here all the time? I have no idea. Either way, I have no proof. I'd be an idiot to even speak.
Yeah. I think they're
But
definitely
I know they're real. But I know they're real.
right.
They exist. That I do know.
I think that anybody that doesn't just totally thinks it's all BS is just someone who hasn't really looked into it,
Yeah.
or isn't of a curious nature.
Yeah. I mean, what other mystery gets fueled on a daily basis? Worldwide. This gets fueled every day. Every day. I'll bet you in every state in America, there's 6, 7 sightings every day because 1%'s talking.
Yeah.
I think it's actually less than 1%.
Yeah,
That's my guess.
I think for every one person reporting it, 100 aren't. I know of just locally here in Massachusetts, and this is a pretty built up area. I know of at least 5 sightings. I mean, they're not on the BFRO website, and they're just friends of friends or a couple of people that I know personally. Hardly anybody reports them.
Yeah, if you're with a group of 10 people, you're going to find 5 people in that group that know somebody
Yeah,
or heard of somebody personally, in their group of friends that maybe didn't have a sighting, but at least had something weird happen to them while camping or camping in their car or, seen something go in front of them at the, on the road and I mean, I've had that kind of luck. It's about probably 1 out of 5 to 10 people.
yeah,
It's kind of amazing how many I find. I run into a guy who, I talked and, he's just super nice guy. Just ran into him, but riding my bike and talking to him. And he goes, "No, oh yeah, my dad did back about 20 years ago." You know what I mean?
yeah.
And so I'm like, "Well, can I talk to your dad?" And he's like, "Sure." I talked to the dad and he's like, "God, I haven't thought of that in 20 years." How many people are like that out there? Lots.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's huge.
I'm speaking to a guy next week. He's coming on the show, and he had an encounter right in the middle of a neighborhood down here in Massachusetts. I mean, I work in the neighborhood all the time. It's white picket fences and ranch houses, and it backs up to the woods, but it's not in the middle of nowhere. This thing came right into the backyard.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. That's one of the most interesting aspects of this mystery. So you need woods, water, and hills, right? Or some of those. Well, that doesn't mean it can't back up to the suburbs.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean these things don't punch in the middle of the night. Besides that, where's all the wildlife? It ain't up at Snellgrove because there it's so spread out. But in the suburbs, right? In some of these rural, semi-populated rural areas, there's so many edges. And it's those edges that attract deer, that attract, all of the predators, that attract all of the, the things like foxes and bobcats and mice and, possums and it's just a whole food chain.
When you say edges, you mean it butts up against something?
Yes. Yeah. It could be edges of forest where it meets farmland. It can be farmland meeting homes. But what a great place for these things to be, to punch in and grab an apple in an apple orchard, or grab 100 apples, or grab a bunch of ripe corn, or pop some potatoes out of the ground.
Yeah.
Eat some organic carrots. Oh, grapes, fruit. I mean, we grow vegetable gardens. And there's so many deer in our in our semi-rural areas versus the middle of the forest. Walk into the middle of the forest and camp. Really take a long walk, 10 miles in. Most people have never done that.
Yeah, I hope to do that this summer.
Go 500 miles in like I have. The middle of nowhere, whether you're 500 miles from the nearest edge. There's no wildlife. It's nothing.
Interesting.
You won't see anything. You'll see nothing.
Huh.
And I do mean nothing until you get out to the edges. That's where the bears will be. That's where the the deer and the moose and the,
Huh.
But a lot of people don't think of it that way. They think, oh, all the Bigfoots are all living in the middle of some forest. No, they're living on the edges.
So they're encroaching on us, not the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's just the fact, Cornell, that edges provide a whole different habitat that's very conducive to wildlife. For instance, I can't take a bike ride in the summer without seeing flocks of wild turkeys, flocks of sandhill cranes, 1 or 2 fox, a few rabbits, a couple of gophers, some pheasants, a grouse, 30 or 40, 50 deer, right? Oh, there's a coyote. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Like, well, in the wilderness, you think I'm going to see that kind of wildlife in an hour?
Huh.
No.
That's funny because where I live, I mean, it's not even on the edge of the woods, and I have seen deer, I've seen coyote, fox, I've seen everything there. And you walk into the woods and you don't see anything like that. You're right.
But listen to this. Now add in snakes, frogs, toads, right? Vegetable gardens, right? Orchards, I can go on and on. When you really start thinking about it, where would you want to live? If you wanted to eat food and there was no food, no grocery store, you're going to stay right where you are in the suburbs.
Where people are growing it.
Yeah, it's just where the food's at. It's where the game is at. It's where the fish is. We live near lakes. We love lakes. It's where the fish are. It's where the geese are. It's where the eggs are. And it's where the bugs are. It's where the mosquitoes are. Oh, which brings in, birds. And of course, birds, it means eggs. And on and on. And if you really start, it piles on and you're like.
I never thought about it that way at all. That's really interesting.
Yeah, you got to think of it that way and so when I say, oh, Joe saw a Bigfoot cross the road 4 miles from my house, but then I look at Google Maps and it's a big, huge, swampy lake area, not one house on it. It's surrounded by farms, but around that lake it's all forested. Connects to corridors that go all the way to the St. Croix River, which then leads to other, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when you look at a map, it all made sense.
Yeah, it's like Leominster State Forest. Now, it is I go up there all the time, just like searching for evidence and stuff. But it's right on the edge of like Route 2 and civilization. But if you follow that forest north, I mean, you could probably keep going until you reach Canada without hitting a house. If you did it right, you wouldn't have to necessarily come in contact with civilization. You might have to cross the odd road here and there, but it's forested the whole way up to Montreal.
Yeah, and I'm not saying a Bigfoot's going to go into a big city.
Right.
It's going to stay on the edges. Do I think they go on the edges of big cities? Dang right they do. I know they do. Yep. And people they just can't fathom that. They're thinking more grizzly bear. But the problem is when a grizzly bear comes into the edges, we kill it immediately.
Right.
Right?
Because it's a threat.
Yeah, and they're out, day and night, grizzly bears. These things tend to, when they come into our suburban edges, they tend to come in at night. Tend to. But once again, I've also talked to so many people that have seen early morning sightings, mid-afternoon. But once again, they just had a small area they had to cross. Right, in our world, where they had to cross the road, but 2 seconds they were out of there and completely hidden again. So you got to take all these things into account. But was there a gas station 3 miles away? Yep.
There's an area right beside me. It's a reservoir called Wachusett Reservoir, and it's surrounded by like a ring road. The bikers, the hardy guys, use this as a kind of a scenic route, and they it's like a 21-mile ring road around it, and people say they've had experiences within that area inside that road. And I'm like, that can't be, because it's not really connected to anything. Do you think they could live inside that small of an area?
I do. Well, I don't think they live there. I think they're utilizing it. 1 or 2 nights, they're out of there.
So you have to look at the connecting areas, the closest area to that where they could retreat.
Yes, they're just using it for a short time, but probably on a regular basis. There may be a plant type that they love.
Huh.
That particular creature likes. I mean, we all have our favorite foods. For instance, in this area, I bring it up only because it's a similar area. It's a big, kind of a chain of lakes, but they're all very eutrophicated. They're swampy. They're old lakes that are kind of filled in. And they finally let some people in this private property to do a study. They found 4 plants that are extinct everywhere else in Minnesota. In this area where there's been big Bigfoot sightings. You know what I mean? It's just kind of makes you think. But also in suburban areas, here's the other thing that people don't think about. Snow hunting.
Yeah.
Dogs are on leashes. There's no camping. So nighttime activity is nil. And you take those other factors in, they're going to know that. They're not going to be hearing guns going off. They're not going to be chased by dogs. I mean, where I live, there's leash laws for, 7 miles in every direction, and most people obey the leash laws. Yeah. You rarely ever see, and if there is a dog ever loose, it's usually highly trained. It's not a bunch of feral dogs running around. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm surrounded by a lot of rich towns that people from Boston, commute to, and there's no hunting there. It's full of apple orchards, and of course dogs are on leashes.
Yep.
So I always think about this area, I don't have to go too far. I don't have to go to BC. I'll walk 10 miles into the woods to find a Bigfoot. I think they're closer than most of us think, like you say.
Yeah. Well, I always talk about, I like to use Snell as an example, but there's one seagull that comes to that lake every summer. Not a flock. One. And that same seagull, that's his air. You won't see another seagull for 100 miles. Here, we have thousands of them by my home. So if you want to catch seagulls and eat them, or their eggs, where would you want to be? And so I think in areas like Snell, they have to migrate farther, follow the berries ripening. But I also think it was a stop because every party at the end of the 4 days, you have to take all of your perishables and throw them out. You dump them out in the woods. And in some cases, it's steaks and eggs and fruit and, it's quite a bit of food. Because you know how it is. You're going to go on and take a 4-day trip with 6 guys. Everybody brings more food than they need.
Yeah.
Because you end up eating walleye every time you're there and potatoes, but everything else goes to waste. That head of lettuce that you thought you were going to eat, you're going to have salad every night. Nope. So 4 heads of lettuce get put out there, a Coke, 5 cantaloupes, a carton of eggs that never got eaten, and on and on, and it's just, and I think these things kind of figured out if they come up there, it's a good place to stop because they can not only get all the berries, but there's these few perishables that get put out, every 4 days.
Great place to put a game cam, the one that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, and I have tried. But I've got I'm not given up. Certainly haven't given up. Wow. I guess I'll either go to my grave not knowing, how they can be fooled, or I'll figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, I'm heading down to Oklahoma. I was down there in October with Dave Wilbanks. He runs the Bigfoot and More YouTube channel. He was. I think he was the only non-white person to see the casino footage. I don't know if you've ever heard about that. The one where
Yes, I have. Yeah. But way back, that goes back to like 2001, 2, 3.
Dave saw the video before it was confiscated. Nobody else ever saw it.
And Dave's, what's Dave's name again?
Dave Wilbanks. He was in Bigfootville, the documentary there.
Oh, yep. Because I tried to get a hold of looking at that footage, and what's the verdict on it?
He said the thing was 9 foot tall.
Really?
and it walks up to the grease. Well, it's like where they put all their grease and stuff.
Yep. Yep.
And he said he could tell the size of it because there was a lamppost there, and they measured the
Yes.
lamppost.
Yep. I remember that. Yep.
Yeah, and I think they just put it under lock and key after that. Nobody else ever saw it outside of the casino. But yeah, and he does research down there in the Kaimichi Mountains and stuff. And I was just with him in October. We went out for 2 days, and I slept through a huge whoop. Dave was trying to wake me up, but this thing was, he said it was like 50 feet away from our tent, and it let out the loudest whoop, and I slept right through it first thing in the morning.
And what time of year was that?
October.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that's when I think the ones in the Midwest kind of head towards like Oklahoma, Ohio. I'm not saying a major migration, but I do think they kind of tend to. I mean, think about it. You're also getting the ripening apples.
Yeah.
You're getting so many things that happen that they can follow waves back. You know, the temperature waves.
Yeah.
Will all of them go to Oklahoma? No. I think some probably stick it out. I've got ducks that are out here sitting on the ice, 30 below weather.
Yeah, we have the
They could be
same.
in Florida. I don't know but some animals just go, nah, I'm just going to stay here.
I always wondered that about the ducks because we see ducks here in the winter and the lakes are frozen. I'm like,
Yeah.
I thought they flew south.
Yeah. They're not only starving, but they'll probably survive. They're just going to just hunker down. And, but you wonder what makes that one animal stay where all the rest have flown to Florida where it's, 75 degrees.
Laziness.
But yeah, it is kind of weird, but I would imagine these animals are the same way.
Yeah.
They're individuals like we are, and some are going to feel good. They're going to be young, and they're going to say, hey, I'm going. Another one might be old and limpy.
Yeah.
I'm not really up to it. I can make a living right here in the winter. I got to figure it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oklahoma seems to be one hell of a hot spot. The story,
It is.
Yeah. Dave has his channel is just dedicated to local sightings. I mean,
Yeah.
and he's got a show every week, and I mean, there's a gas station down there where he lives, and it's just a huge, like 20-foot Sasquatch outside, and you can actually buy tree knockers in the gas station. They sell them. I'm like, you gotta be, and I didn't buy one, and when I got home, I'm like, why did I buy one of those things? One of those things you just think at the time, and you're in a rush and you can't be bothered,
Yep.
and yeah, it's just not everybody believes it, but I would say about 50% of people just accept it down there.
Yeah, Oklahoma, I mean, think about it. They have somewhat moderate weather. They have a lot of water, a lot of mountains, a lot of forests. That's all you need.
Yeah,
And a lot of edges.
yeah, that's true.
Yep.
Yeah, and people it's not uncommon for someone to own like 80 acres of property.
Yeah.
A lot of people own like a lot of land, and there's a lot of room for them. So I'm going down there, and I keep getting notifications from Facebook. I don't know how to turn them off. It's annoying. Well, that's
Well, I can't hear them, so they're not bothering.
Good.
For now.
Well, listen, Doug, thanks very much for coming on. It was a pleasure
Yeah.
speaking to you. You gave me a lot to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no end to all of the topics that a person could talk about on this. It's just anybody that's not interested in this topic, it just amazes me.
I know.
You would think every scientist would be all over this. They're just no interest.
Yeah, it seems to be. I don't understand it either. They just don't seem to care. Even if they heard that they did exist, they still wouldn't seem to care, and it blows my mind. I think it's absolutely terrifies me too. It doesn't just fascinate me. I find them kind of scary. If I was out in the woods, like Dave, he goes into the woods by himself and like camps out in the open. I don't think I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, you have to get over your fear. They're definitely big.
Yeah.
Well, not all of them, but eventually, yeah, they get pretty big. They seem to be. When you see one in person, you still can't fathom it. You just cannot fathom it.
Yeah. Well, 8 foot tall. I mean, the room that I'm in right now is 10 foot tall, and I can't imagine a creature on 2 legs being that size. I mean, it seems to be just there's no way. But I've heard it.
It gets pretty nuts. So anyhow, well, we'll do it again.
Oh, thanks for coming on and let me know how everything goes. I'm sure I'll see you on Facebook.
Yep. Thank you, Cornell. It's good talking.
All right,
Bye.
Doug. Thank you very much. Yep. See ya.
So there you have it, folks. That was Doug Hajicek. That was a fascinating interview, and especially the bit about these things being so close to the edges of civilization. It makes a lot of sense, and you don't have to go, 100 miles into the wilderness to capture a glimpse of these things, but I'm still going to anyway. Anyway, until next week, where we have actually a great example of that. A guy in Massachusetts saw one of these things in a neighborhood in Holliston, and it's a pretty built-up area. So it'll be great to speak to him. So until then, guys, over and out.